Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development Interview Series. My name is Michael Clark, host of the CCA's Leadership Development Podcast, and I'm joined today by the current president of the CCA, Yi-Ling Lin. Yi-Ling, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
For those that don't know Yi-Ling very well, I'm going to give a little bit of background on her, and then we're going to dive into our discussion today. But as I mentioned, Yi-Ling's the current president of the CCA. She's also she's on her LinkedIn profile, at least, she's got listed, she's the Actuarial Services Advisor for Third Horizon Strategies, which is an advisor firm focused on shaping a future system that actualizes a sustainable culture of health nationwide. We're going to talk about that as well. In addition, Yi-Ling's worked as a healthcare actuary for various consulting firms, including the Terry Group, Aon. She's a pioneer in the development of sophisticated analytics that support organizations in navigating the new healthcare environment, and has over 20 years of experience advising clients on strategic planning, pricing, and contract negotiations. Now, a few other interesting things about Yi-Ling. So first of all, you can check out her CCA President vlog on the CCA's website, where she's been sharing insights on networking, finding success through failure. You can see her documented journey through the New York City Marathon, learning to surf in Hawaii. There's some good footage of her wiping out a few times. It's definitely worth checking out. In addition to this, Yi-Ling's also one of the co-founders of Abacus Actuaries, which, if you're not familiar with them, is a network of aspiring, practicing, and former actuaries working together through mentorship programs, networking, and other professional development opportunities to break the bamboo ceiling so that Asians can achieve equal representation in the highest ranks of the actuarial profession. I want to talk more about this as well. Outside of all of the professional stuff that Yi-Ling does, one thing you might not know about her is that she and her family are big cruisers. They like to go on cruises, so much so that she was actually married at sea by the captain of the ship that she was on off the shores of Baja, Mexico. Her marriage certificate is registered in Bermuda, and it has geographic coordinates on it.
Yeah.
Has the cruise thing just always been how did you guys get into that?
I think, yeah, parents just got into it when they were, getting older, and then we started going with them, and it sort of just caught on. So yeah, almost every like spring break or somewhere where you try to get out of the cold, we're on a cruise ship.
All right, what's been your favorite cruise so far?
Last year we went to Japan, actually. So we flew into Tokyo and then did the main Japanese island via sea. So we circled the whole thing. It was really cool.
Yeah, that's really fun, actually.
Yeah.
Different. You don't hear a lot of people going to Japan to go on a cruise. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, the great thing about a cruise is that you can go to stops, and it's only one day, right? But you get a taste of it. And then you decide, oh, I really want to go back there. And then you go back there, right? So,
okay.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's start talking about just your career path in general. So I want you to tell people where you started, and how did you go from where you started to where you're at today?
Sure. So, in college, I was in a somewhat math degree program. I was actually an econometrics major. So think like really early machine learning type stuff, way back when. And I got a job as an intern at a utilization review company for a healthcare firm. But way back then, that was like a new thing, and it was separate from like the carriers. It was its own company. So I got an internship there, started learning about healthcare, and then went there full time to work. Totally as just like a business analyst, has nothing to do with actuarial whatsoever. And met an actuary while I was there, and thought, oh, this would be a great place for me to like pursue a career and start taking exams and all that sort of stuff. And about a year in, I was like, what am I doing at a company with no actuaries? I need to figure it. I'm really going to do this. I need to move, right? So I ended up moving to a healthcare insurance company in the suburbs of Chicago. Small firm. It still exists, actually. It's Trustmark Insurance. And I was there for a couple of years and decided I didn't really like insurance. And so from there, kind of moved over to the consulting space, and been there ever since. And as you said, I've been through a couple of the large firms. I've been at Mercer. I've been at Aon. I actually worked for JP Morgan at one point in time because of the path and mergers and acquisitions and all that sort of stuff. Ended up at the Terry Group. That was, wow, that was a while ago, 10 years ago. And then Terry Group ended up selling off its health business to Third Horizon Strategies. So that's where
Okay.
I ended up.
So as you've worked for the various companies that you just listed over the years, what have you learned about yourself as you've made those transitions? Obviously, starting out um, with the insurance side of things, and then moving into these consulting firms, and obviously through acquisition and through then just taking new jobs, to where you're at today. Like, what are the things that you've learned about yourself through all of those different transitions?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've learned about myself is that I get bored pretty easily at work. So, if I do something a little too many times, do it too long, I'm always looking for a new challenge. So learn something new, take on new client, produce a new tool, figure out new legislation. The last thing I think I really like dug my heels into to try to figure out was expert witness work, which is really interesting and fun. But yeah, I figured out that I get bored pretty easily at work, so I gotta.
Okay, so how did you
myself.
figure that out? Funny enough, like I completely relate to that. In fact, I tell people that a lot about myself, about what I like about my current job, is that it gives me a lot of variety in what I do. Because if I don't have that, I get bored as well.
Mhm.
How did you come to that understanding?
I think, well, early on, right, I started working for an insurance company. And if you've never done that, when you're managing a block of business, it's literally like you have to do the financial reports every first week of the month. And then you have to do this report, in the middle of the month. And then you have to do this analysis, the third week of the month. And it just goes and goes and goes. And so, yes, the results, and you're looking at things differently every month, but it's sort of the same thing, right? So
Mhm.
after a while, I'm like, I'm not trying a new challenge. I'm not trying to figure out how to fit this puzzle together or whatever, right? I need that challenge mentally.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Um, so you mentioned Third Horizon Strategies, something that spun out of the Terra Group. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing for them?
Yeah, they're a cool firm. So Terry Group and Third Horizon had actually worked together for a number of years before this merger happened. And Third Horizons is all about sustainable healthcare. So it's value-based care, but they really have a specialization in like behavioral health and substance abuse and payment reform. So they see that the system's broken and they're trying to go at it in places that are meaningful to the staff to fix the problem. So I don't think he'll be upset at me sharing this because it's public, but David Smith is actually a recovering addict. And so, and he's the president. And so out of his trials and tribulations in life, he's moved on, figured it out, launched a firm, and is trying to help other people through the things that he knows how to do and through the things that his staff know how to do. So lending actuarial knowledge and support from my background in healthcare has helped look at payment reform and how do we incentivize parties to do the right thing, or make it so that things make sense, right? That things are covered when they should be covered early on in the process, not when you're really sick, that sort of stuff.
So when you talk about the system being broken, maybe elaborate on that a little bit more, like from the viewpoint of yourself and the company. What is it what are the things that you view as not working as efficiently as they should?
Well, yeah, for those that aren't health actuaries, the entire healthcare system right now is based on insurance, and insurance right now is paid on when you get a medical service done, right? So you go to the doctor, you get paid for it. Well, the blunt, obvious sort of incentive is the doctor wants to see you more, which means you're sick, right? So they actually don't have the incentive to make you better. Now, I'm not saying that they're not trying to. It's just
Mhm.
that the perverse, like financial
The,
system of the whole thing.
the incentives aren't there to create the right, necessarily incent the right behaviors, right?
Right. And so, should we be spending money on trying to cure your hypertension, or should we be spending money on trying to prevent you from getting hypertension in the first place? Right. And so,
Mhm.
if you change the system by paying people to keep them out, maybe that's actually a better outcome and use of our money than waiting for people to get sick and then have to come and then spend the money at that point in time.
That seems like a giant lift, though, to try to
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
because like you mentioned, like this is the way that the U.S. healthcare system is set up. How do you, as an organization, how do you look to change this? I mean, that's like we said, we're talking about a big ship that you're going to have to try to turn here, and that's going to take a monumental effort.
Yeah, and obviously we're not going to do it ourselves, right? And
Hmm.
nobody's going to do it ourselves, and it's probably not going to happen for 30, 40 years, right? So it's
Hmm.
sort of in my heart, I believe this is the right thing to do, and just because I don't see the end result doesn't mean that my efforts aren't worthwhile. Um,
Hmm.
but like there are organizations that believe this too, right? So a health system, for example, a hospital system in a particular area of the country might thoroughly believe this and want to change the way they get paid by insurance to align those incentives. So
Hmm.
we kind of come in and help them sort of figure out, well, how do you want to get paid? And how do the insurance companies want you to be paid? And how do we marry those two things where everybody is happy, but that the incentives are aligned so that you get paid when people come do their preventative visits and they get better in their A1C diabetes measurement gets lower, that sort of thing.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, it sounds fascinating. It sounds like something that obviously you're very passionate about, and it'll be fun to watch the progress you all make with what you're trying to do there and to see how some of that stuff catches on over time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things where, you look at yourself and you go, am I doing my job just so somebody else can make money, or am I doing my job to help people? Right. And
Hmm.
both are fine. But I personally, at this point in my career, I'm like, oh, I find real satisfaction in doing something that I think might actually help people in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Let's talk a little bit about some of your volunteer work, both with the Conference of Consulting Actuaries and then Abacus Actuaries. You and I have obviously gotten to know each other through our participation with the CCA. When you look at the time that you've been involved with the CCA, what are some of the more tangible benefits that you've received from volunteering with the organization?
I mean, the biggest thing is meeting people. I mean, meeting you and all the other people who are constantly volunteering, either on committees or on the board or showing up to the meetings. It's a great place to network, and you just learn so much from talking to other people. So you don't have to have a motive of, I want to get to a certain position or hobnob with who. So, like that's secondary to sitting down to dinner and having a fun conversation with somebody, or saying, oh, well, like, what do you do? And let me understand that. And how's that cool?
Absolutely. I mean, especially because, like you said, I mean, absent the CCA, you and I would have probably had no reason to have our paths cross, seeing as I'm a pension actuary, you're a healthcare actuary. We're in different spaces completely. But I agree with you. Like, so in those volunteer organizations where you get to come in and meet other people, sometimes it's just a matter of seeing how other people do things, from running a meeting to interacting on a committee or a task force, and you get to see different perspectives on how people approach things.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I've learned so much from so many people, and people who you may quote unquote think as senior to you, right? They've gone through the presidency track or they've led a committee, to just somebody brand new has a different like look on things. And you're like, oh my gosh, I never even thought of thinking about it that way.
Mhm, mhm. Now, obviously, you've been in the as the CCA president for just a few short months when we're recording this. What have you learned so far from your experience as president of the organization?
um, I think as I've done leadership roles in other places, it's funny because it seems so daunting, right? You say, "Oh, you're the president, or you're the leader, or the whatever." Well, when you get there, you're just helping other people succeed. Really, I mean, you're just helping the people who are leading those committees like clear the path so they can do their thing, or the staff. You're just trying to help them like sort through. Well, a decision needs to be made. What are we doing? And we talk through it, and then it's sort of a mutual decision. I don't know that I see this as some sort of like great power or, leadership or whatever. I'm just like clearing paths for people to be great.
Oh, I love that description, right? Because I think, like you said, a lot of times maybe people misconstrue what leadership looks like, and we'll talk about more about your views on leadership later in our conversation. But I like that notion of a leader is there to help facilitate other people getting things done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Well, obviously, you and I are big fans of the CCA. Let's talk for a minute. For those that don't know, what does the CCA have to offer actuaries, regardless of their practice area?
Oh, well, the first thing we talked about was networking, right? Just meeting new people or whatever. But it's a place to gain some skills. I mean, if you volunteer, you get a chance to try things that you've never done before, lead a committee, put together a paper, um, speak at a session at a meeting. And these are safe places to do these things, right? So if you're not like 100% on top of your game, you're not going to get fired, right? There are
Hmm.
plenty of other volunteers that are going to help you succeed. And so it's a great place to stretch your wings and learn and gain skills that you can take just about anywhere.
What about someone that's worried about the time commitment, right? You think, all right, I've got my day job, I'm putting in time there. Um, if I volunteer, am I going to get sucked into something that's going to, create another 20 hours of work for me every week?
Yes. I think it certainly has that potential, but it certainly has every potential to be um, as limited as you make it, right? So you just have to be honest. You're like, I want to volunteer, but in a small way because I have limited time. I want to volunteer only whatever, once a week or in a very short 2 month span, and then I have to drop off because I know I get busy in the summer. Whatever it
Mhm.
is. Be honest. Um, and then you can put in what you can.
I think that's the one thing that maybe is daunting to people when they look at these volunteer opportunities that are out there, regardless of the organization, and they look at that and say, "Oh, I just don't know how I could fit that in," or "I don't know that I want to do that on top of my day job." But I've found it to be exactly what you've said. You can define your own parameters there and be as involved or as little involved as you want. With any of these actuarial associations, especially, they're just happy to have people helping.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think the biggest thing, a lot of us leaders of these actuarial professions talk to each other, right? Because we get ideas off of each other. And a lot of the times we're talking about volunteer engagement and how do we get more people to be involved or different people to be involved or different levels or different practice areas or, all these sorts of things. So, yeah.
I like what you said too, because I think people come at the volunteering piece with different motivations as well, right? There are those that look at it and say, "Hey, I want to give back to a profession that's given so much to me, and this is my way of giving back." And maybe that's the stereotypical reason why others think that people volunteer. But I've come to find that it's less about that, and it's more about some of the stuff that you mentioned earlier with the opportunity to network, to gain new skills. I know for me personally, that's what I've gained out of volunteering is I've actually gained a lot more skills that have helped me in my day job and helped me with what I do there. That's made that very valuable time for me personally.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, when I actually for a long time hesitated in volunteering for all sort of the reasons that you said, right? And finally was just badgered into it. And when I started, I had already been, I don't want to say senior leadership, but higher up, kind of in
Mhm.
the organization. And so I presented to big clients and things like that, but I never spoke at a big meeting, 300, 200 people in the room sort of stuff. Um, so that was a new challenge. But then after doing that at the CCA a few times, when you come back to your client meetings, they seem much more intimate. And so you come at them a little bit differently.
Mhm.
And so it was just a different way to develop a different rapport in my day to day.
Yeah. No, I love that. Like I said, there's a lot of things that you can learn about yourself, develop new skills, all of that can come from volunteering while giving back to the profession. I don't want to minimize that. You
Oh,
are
for
doing
sure.
it service there, but there is a lot to be gained personally and professionally from doing so.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Abacus Actuaries for a few minutes. So you're one of the co-founders of the organization. How did the idea to create Abacus come about?
Well, honestly, that's Sherry Chan's brainchild. So she, I guess, had rolled it around in her head for a while, and she kind of called me one day and said, "Hey, I have this thought. What do you think?" And I said, "I love it. I think there's definitely a need out there." And so we got together, and at first it was just she and I just sort of spitballing, like, well, what does this mean? And what do we want this thing to be like? Um, and as we started talking about it, we had found others. Specifically the SOA and the CAS had this joint DEI thing called the JC. And there were people starting to get involved in the JC, and there was a group of Asian actuaries that were a part of it with no organizational home other than the JC. And so we sort of linked together and said, hey, we should, Sherry and me and these other folks should join together and actually really launch a full-on organization. So that's what happened.
Yeah, and people that are interested, you mentioned Sherry. Sherry was a guest on our podcast last year. You can go check out that episode as part of our podcast series as well. We talk a little bit about Abacus as well. So what has the organization been able to accomplish in its relatively short existence? I mean, you guys have been around for just a few years now. From those initial spitballing ideas to a full-blown 501c3 organization that has a board of directors and leadership. And what have you been able to do?
Yeah, so I think the idea of the whole organization was we noticed that Asians tend to make a career out of being individual contributors, right? They don't get to leadership positions. They don't stand up in the profession and become president and all that sort of stuff. And it's not for lack of talent. There's something else missing, right? And so the idea was just to figure out, well, what is it that's missing and how can we help others sort of get to the point where that representation really is there. What the organization, I think, has accomplished is that there's a lot of people more cognizant of that. Maybe you noticed it in the past, but you really didn't consider why that's the case. That is actually a systematic structural thing. Not every single person that you see is just not interested in being a leader. And so a lot of the effort has been sort of educating not only allies, but also Asian actuaries too. So I think some Asian actuaries, they scratch their heads. They're like, I do great work, I get great reviews, but I never get the big project, or I never get a chance at that leadership position. And they had never figured out why until they talked to a mentor, they listened to some of our webcasts, that sorts of thing. And so the awareness is actually the big achievement, I think.
I think that's really interesting. And again, just we'll reiterate some of the stuff we talked about it in our just in my discussion with Sherry on the podcast as well. But people might not realize that when you look at just the portion of credentialed actuaries that have Asian heritage or background, it's disproportionate compared to population statistics, disproportionately high compared to population statistics, and not by a little bit, which I think is really fascinating. We've got these other affinity organizations within the profession, like the Organization of Latino Actuaries, the International Association of Black Actuaries, that are trying to help with an underrepresentation problem. Abacus is dealing with another problem, which is, hey, we're actually overrepresented as far as the profession goes. But to your point, it's all about the representation at those senior levels, leadership levels, that you're focused on, which I don't think a lot of people are, like you said, they're probably just not cognizant of.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But it is interesting, and I love what you've said about it's not only about building awareness within the profession so that people can see some of this and be like, oh, okay, I need to take this into account when I'm considering people for projects and promotions and leadership positions. But I really like what you said about how some of it too is helping those Asian actuaries recognize what's happening and ways to address it.
Yeah, it's I get a lot of people, especially the ones that I end up mentoring, that say, well, how am I going to move to that next step? Right? What's holding me back? And they always quote, I do great work, my manager loves me, I do great reviews, I'm always, I don't have a lot of mistakes in my work, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, do you speak up at meetings? No, people don't call on me, or I don't think I have a lot to contribute. Like, that's your problem.
And is
Say
that a
something.
and do you attribute that to just cultural ways that people are brought up with
Yeah.
an Asian background?
Yeah, I was thinking about this and how to get this, how to relay this to an ally that might hit better home. So Asians are raised to have a lot of respect for authority and for elders, like to an extreme, I think, to somebody who's not
Mhm.
brought up in that culture. And so, what if I said to you, Michael, in a meeting, the next time you say something, you need to either begin your comment or end your comment with, you old fart, um, grandpa, grandma, or you has been. So, hey, you has been, my idea is to do this. You would never do that. In
Right.
fact, if I told you to do that, you would be super uncomfortable doing it anyway.
Yep.
That's what it feels like to us
Without having to say it. Yeah.
without saying it. If
Yeah.
I just raise my hand and say, I have a comment, that's what it feels like to us.
Interesting. No, it's interesting. And there's a lot of things to obviously break down there in terms of just how do you overcome that? How
Mhm.
do you deal with that so that you can push through some of that discomfort to break through some of those barriers?
Yeah, yeah,
That's
for
interesting.
sure.
Well, so let me ask you this then, because you hit on you mentioned this earlier, and I'll bring it back around to you specifically. So we talk about there is an underrepresentation of Asian actuaries in leadership positions, but here you are as president of one of the major actuarial associations in the U.S. So talk to me for a little bit about how do you feel about that? Like I mean, I'm trying to think of the major actuarial associations. Have we had someone that of Asian background in these leadership positions before? I mean, there's not many, if there are, and you're probably one of the first. So talk to us about what that means to you.
Yeah, well, this is where the Asian culture kind of comes in, right? It feels weird. I feel uncomfortable with it, bluntly. I am not a person who generally seeks attention, and so any attention you give me, I'm like, oh, okay, fine. um, I got here because people pushed me and made me realize that I have something to give to the profession, and actually, I feel like I owe it to the profession. Um, Even just on the basis of just representation, right? Somebody needs to see an example of somebody else out there for you to say, yeah, I can do it too, or we belong, or all those sorts of thoughts. And so if I got to this point and I didn't do it, I think I'm doing a disservice.
I love that. And actually, we mentioned this as part of the your intro, your CCA President's vlog. Some of the stuff that you're sharing is actually pretty vulnerable. Stuff that I'm guessing, based on what you said, that when you're putting some of these together, you're like, I don't know that I want to share this. Um, but you're doing it anyway, talking about your
You
marathon experience, surfing, all these things that you're trying and and showing, pushing through failure to get to success.
So I think that's a difference in the culture. It's super easy for me to tell you how bad I am at things. It's the Asian thing is to be humble. Oh, I'm not that great. You're the one that's great, that sort of thing. And so for me, my background kind of just says, yeah, I'll tell you how horrible I am at something, or how I had to try like a zillion times. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is standing up and saying, look at me. You should follow me. No, that's
Well,
not.
well, not to make you uncomfortable then. Like I'll take your New York City Marathon one, right? I looked at that and I mean I can imagine going through that journey. The most I've ever done is a half marathon, and those nearly kill me. I've done two of them. And I look at what you've done with the marathon piece and being able to, I mean, you can see at the end of that video, like it wipes you out. It's a lot. But you did it, and I sat there in awe, going, it's just amazing, what you're able to do. So you may feel like you're showing failure there, and I'm sitting there like just in total awe of what you were able to accomplish, and being like, man, I wish I could be more like that.
Perspective is a funny thing, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. It's crazy. No, but I appreciate your thoughts there too. And I think you're doing a stand-up job as far as representing that with the Asian heritage and being in leadership and doing everything that you said that you felt like you should do with this. Like, I hope it gives more Asian actuaries the impetus to push forward and actively seek out those leadership roles, because there's a lot to contribute there.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think what we just said, perspective is so interesting. It's great to have just different backgrounds, different viewpoints. It's not just age, it's not just race, it's also just how did I grow up? What kind of environment? You know, like I got into health equity in the last few years. And really looking at, well, how did someone come to a certain point in time having to overcome different things than I did? And how does that shape kind of how I behave and what I do, and how do they like see things in the world?
And I think that part is really interesting, because when you start getting at it, everybody's got that, right? And everybody's got that thing that has shaped them, whether it was their upbringing, where they grew up, how they grew up. And I think you come to realize that everybody has that type of a story. And it really is how we deal with it that really defines where we end up in life.
Yeah, and how you contribute to other people, right?
Mhm.
Because you came from a different place, you have things to teach me, and I have things to teach you, and
Absolutely.
it's great.
Yeah. Well, again, you're doing an awesome job sitting in that president's chair with the CCA. And like I said at the beginning, I'd encourage everyone to go out and check out your vlogs there and stay up to date with the stuff that you're releasing and talking about, because there's a lot of good content to unpack there that I'm sure will be beneficial to a lot of people.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about leadership, and I want to get your thoughts on people you consider to be successful leaders and the traits that they have, how they demonstrate that leadership. From your perspective, what does that look like?
I think to me, leadership is somebody who I can rely on, right? And so that's not necessarily the big powerful person in the room, although it could be. There's also leadership in being that consistent. I can go to you and know it's going to get done with quality. And there's, you know, it's then out of sight, out of mind for me, right? So you could be that individual contributor and be a leader in a way that shows other people who are around you what it looks like to be a dependable go-to kind of colleague. At the traditional sense of leaders, those are, again, people that you can go to, depend on, know that they're going to be there trying to drive you to be the best. And so I've been very fortunate to have many people near me and in my orbit that have saw something in me, I couldn't tell you what, and pushed me or hinted or cleared the path for me to discover what I could do for myself. And I think leaders do that for not only the people that they touch, but people who are just looking at what they're doing and saying, hey, you said you watched my marathon video and you were like inspired. Well, I guess, if you watch that, I might not know you, but I might have sparked something, right? And hopefully you go and tackle something new.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. And I think that's a unique perspective that if all the people that I've talked to on this podcast, that I don't think that's come up yet, that the fact that an individual contributor can show their leadership by their consistency that they can provide to other people. And I really like that. And I hope people will take that to heart, because especially in someone's career progression, like there are some things that you can do to demonstrate that leadership early on in being able to be reliable, be consistent. And I think that's a unique spin on that.
I mean, it's just the first step, right? You're not going to get anywhere if you can't do what you're assigned to do in a way that other people can rely on you. And so that's the very first step, is do what you do it great.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I like the other part that you brought along too with that, which is also, and I'll see if I can reframe or say it in my own words what I heard you say, which was you also have people that can find kind of that diamond in the rough in people and push that forward and say, hey, look, I see this in you. I want you to take this next step and be able to bring them along or push them along, as the case may be, to be able to develop or utilize those skills and abilities.
Yeah, like I said, I'm super lucky to have had a few people like that in my life. I honestly, I wish there were more. I understand that life gets busy. You got your own work and your 5,000 emails that you got to get through and all that sort of stuff. And so to take time to push somebody else to do something takes some effort. But can you imagine what the world would be like if every one of us had somebody sort of tugging you along?
No, it's true. It's true. So when you think about people that you consider to be role models when it comes to leadership, how have you tried to emulate their examples?
Well, I'm going to call out a name. The most obvious one, if you know anything about me, is Tom Terry.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom is amazing because he has always preached continuing to learn and grow. Right. So he never, in all his accomplishments, never sat still for a second. Was always trying to reach for something, understand something new. And you see that and you're like, well, I mean, if this guy is still going 70,000 miles a minute, I can too. Or at least I can go half of the speed that he's going. It's crazy.
It is pretty funny, and Tom also has been a guest here on the podcast. From I was just looking back at our schedule. This was clear back almost 4 years ago now that Tom was a guest here, and I think anybody will. There's a lot of benefit to going and listening to that interview as well, for all the reasons that you just articulated. Right, Tom's a go-getter and is continually learning, and that comes through in the conversation that he and I had as well.
Yeah.
So how have you tried, to talk about that continuous learning mindset? How have you tried to adapt that into what you do on a regular basis?
I think it's a curiosity, right? Like let your curiosity develop and exercise it. So if somebody says something, instead of saying, oh, I don't understand, and I'm going to go have another conversation or just gloss over it, right? Just dig in. I mean, people like talking about themselves, bluntly, right? So if you get interested in what they're saying, they're happy to explain things to you. Nobody sort of sits there in their head going, you're wasting my time, blah, blah, blah. And so actually the most recent example of that was I got in to sit in the first meeting of this rethinking the retirement system in the United States that the CCA sort of put together this group. And the room was retirement actuary practitioners. There were some policy people in the room. There were some employers in the room. And everybody talked about like, well, what does a successful retirement program look like? And what sort of mechanisms do we have right now in the US that address different aspects of this? And it was an interesting, thought-provoking conversation that I'm not a retirement actuary. I just sat there and like absorbed. So fascinating. And so many things that we're doing right and so many things that we're doing wrong and maybe things that we could blend a little better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's bring this back to the actuarial profession as well. And the future of the profession, what do you see are the imperatives for future successful leaders within the profession?
I think we need to be adaptive to change. So unfortunately, insurance and actuaries, we're not typically known for rolling with the times. Profession's been around for 150, 200 years, whatever it is. And yeah, we tend to go slow. And I think the world is moving very, very fast, and we need to sort of pull up our pants and get going. And so AI is one of those things that I think that we've started trying to embrace, and we need to keep going with it. But there are going to be other things. And so I think the profession to grow out of its strict, we do insurance systems sort of mindset. We need to break out of that.
Yeah. How would you suggest, like, if I'm an individual, I mean, you can say that broadly for the profession, right? That we
Yeah.
need to be adaptive to change and be able to move faster. But speaking to an individual, what would you tell them? Like, how do they get comfortable with that concept?
I mean, how do you get comfortable with anything? Immerse yourself, right? And you don't have to do it at your job necessarily, but like if you're playing with ChatGPT, at home, if you're just reading articles about AI and understanding what all these things are, it's a little less daunting. And little less daunting means I'm more willing to engage in the next step and then the next step. And so I think just keep an open mind, right? Like just because you're comfortable doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. Um, I real world example, I this is kind of silly, but I have two dogs, and forever I just like vacuumed their hair every day. And that's just all I did. And I finally bought one of those robot vacuums. I thought those things have been out for what, 15, 20 years at this point. I finally bought one and it was like life changing. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have to do this anymore. But I just didn't open my mind to it until recently. And I couldn't even tell you why.
You know what I like about that, and this, I'll tie this back to something we talked about earlier in our conversation, and that goes back to this notion of volunteering, right? You said take the things that you're tinkering with at home and just kind of doing on the side, and then look for those applications. I think that volunteering fits in that same vein, right? A lot of times with these volunteer committees, and I think there's lots of actuarial organizations that are looking at AI as an example. You pointed that one out, and trying to figure out, hey, how do we adapt to this? How can we utilize this within the profession? And being involved in some of these professional associations and the volunteer opportunities can give you those experiences where you get to try something that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily do at work, but then you can find the application to bring it back to work. Which is, again, the thing that I'm a huge proponent of, and can talk about the benefits of volunteering all day, is that what do you get to bring back to you as an individual, and how can you then contribute to your employer on a higher level or a bigger scale? It
Yeah,
all comes through that volunteering aspect of things.
it can actually be pretty powerful, right? So like in the instance of AI, a lot of us have not incorporated it to our day-to-day functions, maybe a little bit here and there, but not a ton, right? And how does that fit into the profession? Well, if the profession hasn't figured it out yet, then if you volunteer for one of these task force or committees that talk about some of these subjects, nobody has an answer, right? Nobody's an expert, and so you're all figuring it out together. And then when you go back to your company or whatever, you're the expert. You're the one who knows the most compared to everybody else because you've been like exposed to all these other different thoughts that people are having as these things develop. And so wow, what a way to leapfrog.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, Yi-Ling, I appreciate your time and thoughts that you're sharing with us all today. Especially the time part, because I do remember what it's like to be president of the CCA, and it is a substantial time commitment too. So I do appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to have this conversation with me today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I want to thank my guest today, Yi-Ling Lin. Yi-Ling, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I think my email, which is probably in the CCA website, or you can always just, connect with the CCA itself and they'll pass it along.
Yeah. And again, I highly encourage people to go check out your CCA President's vlog, which people can also find on the CCA's website and on the CCA's LinkedIn channel. So I encourage everyone to please subscribe and like this podcast to help us share stories like Yi-Ling's that can help benefit the actuarial community. And the leadership development community of the CCA is open to any actuary. You can reach out to CCA staff to join. A special thanks to Shannon Peterson of CCA staff for helping to produce today's event. Join us for upcoming CCA events and follow us online on social media and on our website. Yi-Ling, again, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.